Hi, I'm Dr. Jason J. Campbell, and in this video lecture today, we're going to discuss logical positivism, also known as positivism, also known as logical empiricism. So if you hear the words positivism, logical positivism, or logical empiricism, you're basically hearing the same thing. They all refer to the same sort of school of thought, more accurately said, to the same means of analysis, because they wouldn't say that they were a school of thought or a doctrine. It was more a means of sort of analyzing the world. But before I jump the gun, let's gradually build our way into discussing logical positivism, is how I'll refer to it, and let's see exactly what the school intended to do and sort of what its contributions to philosophy and science were. All right, so logical positivism. What is logical positivism? What are the influences? How did it begin? And so on. Generally speaking, logical positivism as a school of thought sits within a higher school of thought, more overarching school of thought known as epistemology. And maybe in another video lecture, probably in the one preceding this, I probably should have done. But in another lecture, I'll explain more in detail exactly what epistemology is, right? Basically, epistemology is a theory of understanding. What epistemologists try to do is they try to describe how we as human beings come to understand our world, right? We have us as perceivers, and we have the external world that exists, and it is the description of how we interact with the external world, right? How we come to interpret objects, the meaning that we generate from this interpretation, how we sort of interact with humans and non-humans, right? Interpersonal interaction and interpretive interaction. So epistemology tries to describe sort of how we come to understand our world. In the previous lecture, I talked about Hume's fork, and I told you that Hume was an empiricist, and with respect to Hume's interpretation of the world, I said that the fork describes how we come to understand both analytic and synthetic propositions. We said that synthetic propositions for Hume were a posteriori, and we said that synthetic are a posteriori and analytic are a priori. So that was Hume's take on how we come to understand the world. So epistemology is sort of concerned with this, right? With our brains, with our minds, what it is that we do when we're thinking. Contemporary epistemologists wouldn't describe our mind in terms of something immaterial, right? They would describe what it is that we do as something material, something physical, to be technical in a physicalist sense, right? Because there is no non-existent mind, immaterial mind. The mind is really your brain, but that's going a little too far ahead, right? So that's basically what empiricists do. There's another group, or there's another segment of philosophy that's intimately related with epistemology. I would argue almost any time you see epistemology described, you're also going to see this other part of philosophy described, and that is the part of philosophy that attempts to describe reality, right? So they attempt to answer the question, what is reality? Right? Not necessarily what is the object, right? Not what is the object, but what is reality? What does it mean to talk about reality? And the segment or section of the branch of philosophy that deals with the explanation of what reality is known as metaphysics. Metaphysics. So you have epistemology, which is an attempt to understand basically reality, and you have metaphysics, which attempts to describe reality, right? So that with respect to this object, I've got a different color, with respect to this object, there's two different functions that happens. You have a branch of philosophy that attempts to explain how we understand the object. So, and that's epistemology. And emphasis is on we understand, right? It becomes sort of a cognitive process, right? It is a meaning ascribing activity, right? How we come to understand it. I understand it, therefore I ascribe meaning to the external world. That's epistemology. Whereas the other part is explain what reality is. And the group that explains what reality is metaphysics. Okay. So one and the same object, two different approaches to describing and discussing this object. The attempt to understand how we interpret the object, how we make sense of the object, is known as epistemology. The attempt to explain what the object is, how the object occupies its particular space at a particular time, is metaphysics. Two different branches of philosophy, both really related. But this is where the story of logical positivism starts, right? This is where the divorce between metaphysics and epistemology starts. As I said in the last lecture, Immanuel Kant reads David Hume, and he realizes that he's been in a slumber, right? And what he realizes is that the relationship between us and the object is problematic, right? We have the perceiver, and the perceiver is looking at the object. And I talked about what the Copernican revolution was. I talked about the synthetic a priori. That's in the discussion on Hume's fork and Immanuel Kant's synthetic a priori. Now, what ends up happening is that we recognize that this projection of the object is part of the phenomenon, right? This is the phenomenal, right? So we talk about the phenomenal representation of the object. But that phenomenal representation of the object is given to our faculty of understanding, and we come to understand. Remember, we said that the categories are conditions for the understanding, right? The necessary conditions in order for us to talk about how we come to understand, how we come to explain, interpret the external world, right? Well, that's phenomenal. Now, there seems to be, according to Kant, something which is deeper than just what we see, the perception of the object, which is what the object actually is, right? So in giving an account of the phenomenal, Kant is giving us an account of sort of the epistemology behind our experiences with the world, how we come to understand and interpret the world. But in giving us the account of what he calls the noumenal, and actually I'll just put it like this, he calls it the Noumena. I'll just abbreviate it. So he gives us the phenomenal and the noumenal, right? The noumenal is what the object is, but that is independent to perception. The noumenal is independent to perception, and obviously phenomenal is perception, right? It is the object as we come to understand the object as we perceive it. And what does this mean? Let me give you an example. Okay, so let me use this one. This Rubik's Cube has 1, 2, 3, 4, I think it has 6 sides. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this Rubik's Cube has 6 sides. This is the face of the cube with the stamp on it, right? And I can see that this side has the stamp on it. This is a very general example, but this hopefully will make sense of this noumenal and phenomenal. Okay. And I can see that this front is on the face. And you can see that this front is on the face. But if I turn the object to face me, you can no longer see the face of the object. All that you see is this yellow. And if I shift it a little bit, you might be able to see some more colors, right? You might be able to see a little yellow, maybe a little orange, a little blue, but you still can't see this white face. The truth of this object is that this object actually has a white face. I showed it to you earlier, but you don't perceive that now, right? So the noumenal, quote-unquote, existence of this object is the total simultaneous perception of this object wherein all sides are sort of revealed simultaneously, right? We don't have the ability to do that. We can't do that. As I'm viewing one side, it's obstructing my view of another side. As I'm viewing one side, it's obstructing my view of another side, right? So all that I have is the phenomenal perception of this object. So the